Hey folks, Greg here with Shacknews, and I'm here with Chris from. I keep wanting to say it Morpheus, but it's not. There's an R in there, right? It's like
Oh, Modiphius.
Modiphius.
Yeah,
I
some
have
people,
pronunciation things all the time.
that's fine. Some people do say Morphidius that we should probably register that name as
I
well.
was like, I think Morpheus is the first thing, but that's totally incorrect. But I'm here with Chris from Modiphius, and he just walked us through a demo of their Skyrim board game, which you can watch in the link in the description below. I highly recommend watching that because we're going to be talking about the design aspects, Inception, all that good stuff. He's not going to go over the game in this interview. We're just going to talk about the challenges and inspirations and the design process. So, hi Chris,
Um,
how are you doing?
I am good. Yeah, very
So
good.
for so we talked a little bit less in the demo about how you were working with Bethesda to make the board game, but I want to talk about how some of the early design concepts that you guys fiddled around with before you settled on what we're seeing now on screen.
Sure, sure.
What were some of the things that like originally you wanted to have in the game that maybe changed drastically from conception all the way to final release that you could mention?
I remember we had a lot of components at one point, and it was one of the things. I mean, it's the thing with games design, especially based on video games, is the video game does so much for you behind the scenes to make it really easy to have dozens of components or tons of weapons sitting in your backpack. But it would not be fun to have 50 cards in your hand for all the gear that's sitting in your backpack. And so
Yeah.
you have to abstract some of these things. Like, what gives you the feeling of carrying stuff around without the complexity? How do you know? And that's how we drilled down to three components: plants, ore, and soul gems, because that was the kind of essence
Hmm.
of stuff that you use. We didn't need multiple different types of plants. We just knew that plants got excuse me, plants powered potions, and you need a certain amount of plants for a potion. We don't need to go, and we at one point we had there's this plants for this potion and this plants for this potion. It was like, let's just have a number of plants that you need, and let's just have an amount of ore that you need for upgrading your weapons or armor. So, a lot of it is about, does it feel like Skyrim, but is it fun? So it's balancing feel and fun is actually one of the hardest things you've got to do in games design, because all too often you get well, why haven't you got this detail? And why haven't you got this detail? Because that's in the video game. It's like, yeah, it's in the video game, because what you don't realize is there's a bucket load of work going on in the programming so that that is fun. And we don't want you have to do that in the board game, because that's not going to be fun if you've got to have a hand of 50 cards or like 27 different types of counters and read 17 pages of rules just to create a potion, right? So it's all about, does it feel like you had a fun battle? Yeah. Does it feel like you were moving around Skyrim and doing stuff that you do in Skyrim? Yes. And we wanted to get this kind of like top level view of adventuring around Skyrim. We didn't want to do a dungeon crawl because we've got a game that basically is a dungeon crawl, Call to Arms. There's no point kind of rebuilding that. This was about giving you that kind of satisfying game loop of, oh, just if I do one more dungeon, I get just enough experience to level up, and then I get a cool new skill. And that cool new skill means I get to roll more dice in combat. And then I might get the cool sword. And then if I do the next dungeon, do you see what I mean? And then I want to do another dungeon.
And it goes on and on. Yeah, tedious is a word you want to keep away from your games, and like things can get tedious when you have, like you said, too many things that you have to organize, or too many rules you have to read, or too many
Yeah.
of something.
The gameplay loop should be so intuitive after you've played it 2 or 3 times. You're just like, yeah, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. And it's just like fast to play. So, yeah. And I think that's fast to play, but I don't mind spending 5 hours playing because it was fun.
So, what was your biggest? You folks did a Fallout board game. What was your biggest takeaway from that experience that you maybe brought with you and applied to the Skyrim board game,
Uh,
if any? Because
yeah, I'm
sometimes they're
just thinking,
completely different.
well, I mean, that was a kind of miniature skirmish game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, really, it was that simplifying down the concepts, because like Fallout, you've got the special stats and you've got the action points. And there's so many things that you're like, but that's Fallout. We ought to have that in, and that's Fallout. But it's actually, well, you don't really like what would give you the feeling of action points. And that was in Fallout Wasteland Warfare, this the dice that you roll that you might get an extra action that turn. And it was like a super simplified version of sometimes you might get some extra actions and luck and stuff like that. And it's little things. Matt Leacock, who designed Pandemic, is classically he's famous for saying, what 2 rules can you take away and replace with 1 rule? Like, it's always about condensing down and condensing down. There's a magic point you get to where you take away another rule and it doesn't feel like Skyrim anymore. It's just a dungeon crawl, and it's just finding that point, that magical point where this is fun. It's easy to understand, and it still feels like Skyrim. And it's a lot of the playtesting is about finding that balancing point where, of course, we can have a really complex game, and we could have gone in loads more detail. We could have had dungeon crawl style maps alongside this that would have taken the gameplay a lot longer. We could have had much more detailed crafting and but then it would have been an all-day game to play what would have taken an hour to 2 hours in this current game. And I'd rather people take all day playing 8-10 hours of fun, or 5, like we've done 5 hours, because none of us wanted to stop, not because we needed 5 hours to play, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Is there any pressure, like in terms of box size or like setup details? Because I know sometimes, like, I think I'm trying to think of a game that we played a lot that we hated setting up. I know Talisman is one of those games where like there's certain games that it takes so long to set up, and like sometimes you're like, I don't want to play anymore because it takes like 2 hours to set up, right?
Well,
Was there any challenge to like making it not intimidating to new players, or because there's a lot of stuff going on, there's a lot of decks, a lot of cards, a lot of spaces, not as many tokens as other games for sure, but there's still tokens. Any kind of pressure to keep it simple?
You've got basically your skill tokens. These are each person's quest tokens that you have. You've got your soul gems, plants, or experience and septims, some horses, threat, and then some wandering monster tokens. The decks that you set up really are, you've got your wilderness and town events, you got your treasure and advanced treasures, basic treasures. You've got these cards are just in a box, you don't need to set them up, they're all ready to go in a box. And then really you just create the dungeon decks from the and those evolve through gameplay, so you keep them all in a box, and then you sort out all the animals that are left, and you get more animals being added in that are more powerful. So the decks start relatively small, I think maybe 5-6 cards, but they end up at like 7, 8, 10 cards as stuff gets added in through the game. And so you quickly sort those decks out, and the players start with their character board. They pick one of the character types. Here you've got an Imperial, Khajiit, Nord, High Elf. There's a couple more, and then you grab your 2 components, and then right at the beginning you don't have to find any other cards because you get given them through the beginning gameplay. When we start the second mission, you get to keep one of the treasures, one of your items, because of course it has to reset you a bit. It's actually 5 years later, so you've bought a farm, you've settled down a bit, and then you have to kind of get adventuring again, but you've become a bit crap since you've forgotten how to swing a sword, and you've got to kind of relearn some of your skills. So you kind of start again, but you've got a bit of stuff to get you going again, a bit of money and so on. So so it's not the fastest of game to set up and play, but it's with a group of you it's not going to take you ages to get playing this game, unlike some, because there isn't loads of setup on the board to do. There's nothing to lay down except maybe a couple of scenario specific like, we had to put this token on Markov here. Yeah, and you keep everything in boxes. You've got little tuck boxes for your character, so in between missions you keep any cards that you might have retained, any gold and septins and so on.
Just because I'm curious, I mean, this is more on the business end, but like any kind of pressure to keep the box small, because I know especially for board game stores and comic stores, those nerd stores, like shelf space is becoming bigger of an issue for them. When you're selling a physical, like, was there any pressure to keep the box as small as you could get it and then sell additional, like you said, you have other versions with like more miniatures as well, but like, was there any pressure in that regard when you were getting ready to get it to print and get it to distributors?
No, I mean, if we design the game now, the world's a bit of a different place. Although it's a bit different because when you go the crowdfunding route, you can do things a bit differently than if this was just going to retail. We would have made a smaller game, I think, and a cheaper game. And because it happened just as the exchange rates changed, and the people, the backers of this, got an insane deal. They got the base game, I think, for around about $90, and it's now like $150 in retail. So, and the box size became the box size it was because of everything that went in it. We didn't unlock a ton of extra stuff to go in this box. We added like around about 48 card little bonus expansion pack just for backers. The unlocks kind of went in all the expansion boxes. So there's like 3 more boxes about half the size of this. So this is quite a deep box. I guess like about as deep as Gloomhaven, if you know Gloomhaven, but not as long.
That's one that I hate setting up. I'm gonna be honest. Like, that's a lot of setup. I'm like, okay, I'm done. Like,
I just punched it out. I just punched the whole thing out, and I couldn't get everything back in. I was like, wait a minute, why? I've just taken all these card sheets out, these die cut sheets out. Why doesn't everything go back in? I didn't get it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it's just Frosthaven I just got. But yeah, I mean, that looks like a really fun game, and so yeah, we didn't go too crazy unlocking more for the base game. We put it all into the expansions. So, and of course, from the distributors, they were like, it's going to be how much? And of course, that has an effect on potential sales. And, but when you're doing crowdfunding first, it gives you a bit more leeway.
You gauge interest a lot easier. Yeah.
Of course. And that funds the big box experience. And it lets you do more stuff than you would do if this went purely to retail. Like, I don't think Gloomhaven would exist if it went straight to retail. I mean, it would now because they're just they've got such a huge.
They have a brand and people know the name,
yeah. But for all of us, all publishers, there are massive hidden costs in creating a game of that size. Artwork and tooling and plastics and so on, that you don't make a lot of money selling a game in distribution to retailers, because by the time it gets down to you're probably getting like 40% of the retail price, and then out of that you've got to pay all the development costs, all the production costs, the sea freight, and
licensing
licensing if it's like this. And the cost of running your company, so that everyone wants to design another game, and if you can't make money doing that, it stops being fun. So you start wanting to do it. So doing the Kickstarter for companies like us, you think, well, why do you come on, it's Skyrim, why do you need to do such a big Kickstarter? And it's loads of money. It's like, well, it helps pay for the enormous cost. I mean, we're talking 4 years of a whole team of people working on this. The graphic design, there's probably like 6 graphic designers spent the best part 2 or 3 months doing all the artwork and graphics design and so on, because there's like 900 cards in the box, which is a huge amount of layout work. And as a business, that's an enormous cost. So doing that means we can keep the cost of the retail edition. Well, I mean, it was a bit crazy, but it probably would have been even more expensive if it wasn't for crowdfunding. So
and sometimes the crowdfunding, what people don't realize, like, I'm not saying you did this, but sometimes it's just It's to show the IP owner that there is interest, and then they'll like, we can do this game for, $50 million. Okay, well, do a Kickstarter. If it hits 10 million, then we'll back the rest of the 40 or whatever. Like afterwards, sometimes it can use to be gauge interest to the investors
I mean, it's,
of the
yeah, of
game.
course. I mean, we always try and do like with Homeworld. We had all the tooling done, and we wanted to add a few extra cool things through the Kickstarter, which we did. But everything was, all the graphic design was done. We just had to do some errata. So we were. That's why we were able to say we're going to deliver in August. And Skyrim finished in December of 21, and we delivered in December 22. So we delivered in 1 year. For a huge box game project like this is kind of unheard of. I mean, we were supposed to deliver in August and we were late, but it was still, even if you think about the 1 year turnaround, it was amazing because we'd done all the tooling, and we weren't, we've made the mistakes before of going, yeah, that's a great idea, let's add another 10 miniatures because we got really excited and we thought that would make more money, and then you forget that that's adding 6 months to the project.
Right.
And I think the big problem with crowdfunding is people get carried away and they go, how to add all this other cool stuff, and it's exciting now, but it's not exciting when you realize it could be another 9 months or a year before you get your game. And I'd rather people get the game when they're still excited, within a few months of still being excited about it, play it and go, this is amazing, I want more. And then you do another Kickstarter and add more cool stuff. And I've made the mistake too of getting carried away and doing too much. And there's nothing worse than delivering a game 2-3 years late. And by that time, games designers moved on, the miniature designers moved on, your team has changed, so there's not even really anyone who still knows about the game, and everyone's like, yeah, but I'm bored of that now. I was excited 3 years ago, but I'm really excited about these other games now, and they're just, it's another game that sits on your shelf. It's so important, I think, to get games into people's hands whilst they care about it.
Yeah, you have that window of time you're talking about when you can't make a Skyrim expansion featuring Ghostbusters, from other games that do that, you shove popular IP into their game, and then that gets that genre, that crowd in. But like when you don't have that, you have to do it. Strike while the iron's hot, I think is what they say, right?
Exactly. I mean, the other thing is, of course, some companies, we do treat it as a bit, like, this is an enormous game. We're not going to go and print 50,000 copies because we think it will sell. Now, we can do a sensible print run on our own, but like we want to know, well, really, how big is this going to be? How many of you want this big box and all the stuff? And that will help us, pay for us sticking more of that into distribution. So, the very fact that we did the Game Fan project meant that we could do more of the expansions and that they could go into distribution. And so you are seeing how many people really want it. Is it 10,000? Is it 50,000? Is it 3,000? And that is a good thing still for crowdfunding. And also Kickstarter is kind of like a Facebook now. I think it is very much like a social media platform that people go and spend time on Facebook. They kind of cruise around, check out cool stuff, go and hang out on one project that they backed and talk to, chat in the comments. Then they chat in the comments on another one, reply to some others, and so it very much is seen as kind of like a marketing platform by the trade, by retailers. So they're looking to see if you're popular on Kickstarter, because then they're like, oh, okay, I better get this game in. So it isn't, when I first started, I funded my baby Acton Cthulhu. It was like, oh, cool new game. We were nobodies, and that is, that is a great way for Kickstarter to work. But it also has become a platform for success. So how big really is this project, and how big is it for retailers, and how big is it for a publisher to go, well, how many are we actually going to make? Because what people don't realize is distributors will go, yeah, we want to order 5,000, but it's rare, and it's a huge risk to print 10,000 copies, because 10,000 copies might, of not a game like this, but like say a small board game might cost say $10 a copy, And if you do 10,000, that's $100,000 of your money sitting in the warehouse, plus
Yeah,
shipping costs.
people
And
don't
if
people forget that. Yeah, like
Yeah, and if
especially
they
when
don't sell, you might have just lost your house because you
yeah,
can't pay your mortgage,
yeah.
because you gotta cover that cost. And so it's great when a distributor says, "Look, we'll order 5,000," and then you go, "Okay, well, look, maybe we'll order the Kickstarter will be a couple of thousand people, and maybe we'll have another 1,000 on top to sell on our web store." But if the distributors aren't saying, "Yeah, we'll order some," then it's like, well, how many do we print? And that's why Kickstarter is great, because then it's like, okay, you got 3,000 backers. Well, print
Now we know we sell
3,000.
3,000 for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can decide, okay, do we take a risk? And if no distributors are ordering, then you go, okay, well, we'll just order a few hundred on top for the web store, and you can be quite careful about it. It's a way of offsetting risk. No one wants to risk their family's home, their life savings, and you also got to think about people's jobs. Like, you can't risk the business's future on a cool board game just because you think it's going to sell, and that's why Kickstarter helps. No, none of the unless you're Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards of the Coast, none of us are that big in
Yeah,
this
the big
industry.
multi-billion-dollar corporations that are literally just
Yeah.
like
All of us are one really bad game deal away from
right. Yeah,
making difficult
one
decisions.
bad
So
decision.
it's we've all got to be careful, and that's why you see a lot of us on Kickstarter doing stuff, but you try and make it worthwhile for everyone so that they get, like I said, Skyrim, everyone got an amazing deal, and that was the benefit of us being on GameFound.
Yeah, it's interesting too because like those other companies you talked about, like Wizards, for example, like if they make an 8th edition D&D and it sucks, they can make up for that lost revenue in Magic, right? Like they can pull money from other places to make up for the loss in revenue, maybe in that
Oh yeah, of course.
section of business arm, right? But when
Yeah.
you're only one company, right? So like you are literally one bad game away from like possibly going under. Like that's any company, that's
Well,
any business, really. I
I'd
mean,
hope, yeah. I mean, luckily we're in a better position. We're in a better
yeah,
position than that. But for most people, they're one bad deal away from really struggling. And I mean, we've seen a lot of companies going down in the last few months, or struggling, or can't pay for their, production or shipping, and it's a really, really tough time. And that's why crowdfunding, well, it's a double-edged sword, because it's very tempting to take that money, and then the danger is you didn't plan it enough, you didn't get enough money, or you didn't calculate the shipping right, or you spent the money thinking you're going to get more money, and then you find yourself in a position. And there's so many stories like that at the moment
oh
where
yeah.
and there's all sorts of reasons why, and backers, unfortunately get the sharp end of the stick. So
Yeah, I do want to talk about because your company is growing, which is a good thing. I remember
yeah.
buying some of your minis, and I'm gonna be a little honest, they were a little rough. Like when you first did your first miniature run, they were a little rough. But like these miniatures in this game that I'm looking at, like it's like your quality has improved drastically. Can you talk about like how you guys have worked that? Because like UK, obviously, Games Workshop's there, one of the biggest provider of miniatures in the world. But like when you're starting out, you don't have those resources, you don't have that money, you don't have that budget to make all these huge miniature lines, right? So you learn, and you went
Oh,
from like a really soft, viable resin to like now it looks like I know
mm.
there's millions of types of plastics, but it's a definitely different type of plastic. I want to say like better plastic, where you don't have to put together. Well, I don't have to put together arms or fist.
Yeah.
That's the
Sure. Well, yeah, for this game, they're in PVC, but it's what we'd call a hardened PVC. So they're a lot stiffer as a miniature. We've done the softer, bendier PVC miniatures in the past and learnt from that. We've developed, we've worked with companies to do, factories to do the hard plastic, like your typical Games Workshop sprue.
right.
So we did those for Call to Arms for the starter sets. We're now developing some Fallout Wasteland Warfare miniatures in hard plastics for sprues. We brought in a guy who'd worked on some of the early Space Marines in plastics from Games Workshop, which really helped. It's a lot of technical expertise to get hard plastic right. So we've been experimenting, and our resin factory, I think now is churning out some of the best resin miniatures in the world. We're probably one of the top 5 company like producers. I mean, the amount of resin we churn out for Fallout and Elder Scrolls every month is insane. I mean, sometimes I think maybe we're a bit too detailed as miniatures, and we have really high tolerances of, you know, what gets thrown away. But I was thinking we should do bits bags of like cast-offs, you know, because sometimes there's just a tiny little bubble in the foot, and actually the rest of the miniature's fine.
But you're like, so, yeah, maybe put those on the market for as the collector or something. Yeah, like
yeah. Bits bags is always fun, and I hate throwing away stuff as well. I mean, I remember seeing at another company the skipper stuff that was being thrown away, and it's like, can I take some of that? It was like, oh my god, I can't believe you're throwing away all this stuff, and it's kind of mostly okay. Anyway, but yeah, you obviously want customers to get the best of the best. So, but yeah, I'm really proud of the team. They've done a great job, really skilled up. We've got a great sculpting team who truly love the properties. They love Elder Scrolls. They love Fallout, and you know, and you really see that come through in the miniatures. And I think we've probably done about 800 sculpts now for Bethesda. Maybe 5 have come back saying, "Oh, can you make this change?" And it's usually something obscure, like, you know, this girl's based on my girlfriend. Can you know, and she doesn't like this bit.
Yeah, I mean, when you work with another person's IP, it's always that way. Like, you don't have final say; they do, and it could be the most weirdest thing in the world. The sword could be too long. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, I mean, we've had so little of that though, where it's like, no, the sword's wrong or the helmet's wrong. It's always like, you know, it's something bizarre, but like 5 out of 800 is insane. And
that's a good statistic for not having to redesign stuff, for sure. But no, that it's just awesome to see you guys grow and learn from that stuff. You know what I mean? Because that's what you like, watching the company evolve as the board games get bigger, more complex, or more detailed. You go from punch out tokens to wooden tokens. You go from a soft resin to a PVC sprue resin. Like you learn, right? You learn and evolve.
Yeah, you definitely, like, starting to do hard plastics, you definitely join the big boys. You know, like, there's plenty of surveys online where it's like, what's your favorite plastic for miniatures? Hard plastic. And
oh god,
you know,
yes. So, dude, you give me die-cast metal. No pewter. No more pewter.
No
more pewter, please.
Yeah. And I remember, you know, I grew up with pewter miniatures and thinking, god, resin's like just cheap crap. Like, it's so lightweight, it doesn't feel like it's worth the money. But of course, the quality is beautiful. You know, but then just hard plastic is just, there's this thing in people's brains. Hard plastic means you're serious. So, you know, we've got that gradual transition. We're experimenting with other types of plastic. I mean, obviously for board games, you need to take the miniatures out of the box and play with them. They can't be on sprues. They've got to be ready to go. And that's why we've got the miniatures for Skyrim. You know, the factory did all the changes to the files and tweaks and sent us through the roughs, and they were like perfect first time. There wasn't a single change that we asked to be made. They got them absolutely spot on. So we were really happy. And we're really happy with the quality of the plastics they've done. They feel really good.
Kids today, like miniature kids today, will not understand the terrible thing of having to work with pewter, or having to work with, specifically, I'm gonna call them out, Games Workshop resin. Like, it's awful. Like, it's fragile, it snaps, it's super expensive. Like they will not, like, it's gotten so much more reasonable the last decade, like, in terms of, like, from a consumer standpoint, to like get invested into a miniature game.
There's the new material that a lot of people band around, Ceocast, which is a Spanish producer, and lots of people are using it, and they call it insert company name resin. They've spent millions of pounds developing, but it's this company called Ceocast, and it's basically it's silicon molds that go into a machine that injects plastic into it that's been melted down from a hopper of little chips, and it is basically resin. It paints like resin. It is flexible like PVC, so it doesn't break or snap. Kind of cleans up like PVC, but they've got a newer, harder version that is, you can file better. So you kind of had to cut, not file.
Right, because it's softer.
And so it's I call it a bit like VHS versus Betamax. That you've got Betamax's is resin, right? It's gorgeous and expensive. Betamax was amazing quality video, ended up being the quality of video that was used in production suites.
Yeah, huge. I used to use huge tapes. If anyone's ever seen them, they're huge.
Yeah, that's right. And they were the master tapes for TV and production. And then VHS was cheap. And everyone
with the
make
cheaper option. Everyone. I remember this because I worked in video.
It was nowhere near as good quality, but it was cheap, so it became the thing everyone used. And you could get all the dodgy movies on it, of course, as well. So
yeah.
So I think, so in a way, you know, I mean, Searcast is, you can produce quicker with it. And it's, you know, there's lots of experimental technologies floating around at the moment. So Searcast is this interesting thing lots of people are experimenting with for a kind of replacement to resin. The really interesting thing is with resin, you get piles of hardened resin that you have to just throw away. So there's a lot of waste associated with it.
You can't melt it. You can't melt it down again or reuse it. It's kind of bonded. The chemical interaction's already bonded. You can't do anything with it.
Some companies grind it down, and they kind of use the grindings to make scenery. But like if you're making like rubble, there's only so much rubble scenery you can make.
Right, right.
So, but with Searcast, you grind it up and you pour it back in the hopper, and it makes new miniatures. So it's, you know, just like as Games Workshop started this whole recycling, but this is like, we can recycle the plastic miniatures that don't work and the sprues that are cut off back into the machine.
That's great. I mean, that's yeah, I mean, that's wonderful. Like,
yeah, so we got one of the machines. We haven't used it for production yet, but we're just kind of experimenting with it and testing and kind of figuring out what might be.
Yeah, like you said before, there's a cost affiliated with that, and is the cost worth the money putting in what you're doing now? And sometimes it isn't, sometimes it isn't. It's all a matter of like what's going on that quarter, what's happening in the future. Yeah, there's a lot of factors.
Yeah. And there'll be a right product range for it. You know, Fallout is heading towards hard plastics. We're keeping Elder Scrolls as this, you know, like collector's resin,
right?
Because it's just really nice. But who knows where, you know, what we'll do. And we've got some other ranges coming. We've got Cohorts Cthulhu, which is our big solo co-op war game that's going on Kickstarter with the role-playing game in the summer. And I think we'll probably have Searcast kind of characters and creatures for that. It's going to be like our first test project, just because we haven't done it in anything else. So let's see what we can do with it and push the barrier. I like experimenting, so.
And then last question I have for you, Chris, is what's next for the company that you can talk about? Like any new Kickstarters down the line, any new board games, contracts in the works that you're allowed to talk about would be great.
Well, obviously, Cohorts Cthulhu. So that's, if you can imagine it, it's, you know, D&D, keep on the Borderlands. You're in the deep dark forest, but it just happens that the guards in the fort are wearing Roman armor. So it's a big epic role-playing setting. It's like the 2nd century AD, and you're in the midst of the forests of Germania, and you're on the front lines, and all hell's about to break loose. Lots of weird cults and monsters in the forests and ancient ruins underneath the fort you discover, and a big war's coming. So it's a kind of big historical fantasy role-playing game. You get to play Roman legionnaires, Greek prophets, you know, Syrian mercenaries, Roman merchants, and you know, you're all running around on these fun adventures, dungeon crawling and you know, going to senators' parties and discovering evil monsters in the basement, and then we've got this war game coming alongside it that's designed from the ground up to be solo and co-op. And you start with one dude who's running for his life, a Roman legionnaire, who they've been ambushed, and he managed to escape, and he's got to make choices, and then he's going to find a friend, and there's going to be 2 of you, and then 3 of you, and then 5 of you. And before you know it, you've got like 10 soldiers and a hero and a centurion surviving against all odds against these creatures. And you're going on these different missions, and you've got to make interesting choices. One of my big things about war games is making it fun to lose. And
yes,
which is more a question, like, why can't it be fun, more fun to lose a game? And the kind of idea behind that is that in the Cohorts Cthulhu war games, you're going to have objectives. You get objective points for completing the scenario objective, but there are story points And story points are often scored by doing the thing that's like on the edge of the map that will take you away from the objective. So do you want to get objective points to build your army? But story points will unlock abilities for your character and new types of characters and new missions. So you might unlock a mission based around Deep Ones or a mission based around Miga, but you have to follow the story points to get those cool stories. But you follow the objectives to build your army. So you've got like difficult decisions that help you play the game, and sometimes you just have to leave the map because it's too tough. And it would, we've developed this AI that is all about surprising you and tricking you, rather than trying to work out the mechanics of moving enemy forces across the map, which is really boring. What I was getting at about, like, how can we streamline the mechanics so it feels like I'm up against a very clever enemy? I just don't need to see what the enemy's doing. So the enemy's constantly appearing around me, doing stuff behind my back to make my life miserable, but fun.
That sounds awesome. That sounds awesome, Chris. And so, like, you guys can check out their store in the link in the description below, as well as the demo we ran for the Skyrim Adventure board game. And thanks so much for your time today, Chris. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it was great demoing the game and chatting.